Hello and welcome to another episode of On Air with Daikin. I'm Matteo Lombra, your host, and today I'm joined by a very special guest. I have here with me Tom Wilson, head of BREEAM Development. Tom, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Great to be here today.
Great stuff. Well, I really wanted to have a conversation with you because for us at Daikin, BREEAM, and it's essentially the BRE, but all of those activities are very important. They're very massive, not just for us, but of course for all our partner network and customers. And so it was just an opportunity to go a bit more in depth into what it is, what it isn't, why it's important, why you would want to know more about it. But also, I do think that quite a lot of our audience will take quite a lot out of this conversation because, as I said, they are very much involved with BREEAM and the BRE almost on a daily basis. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. But I guess good place to start is, who are you? What do you do for BREEAM? Like, just give us a bit more on a background.
So my background, I am the head of BREEAM Development. So I'm involved in creating all of the new BREEAM systems, with version 7 that we have just published being the latest iteration of that. In terms of BREEAM and BRE, BRE, for those who aren't aware, is the Building Research Establishment. So we're a science-led organisation that's been working on improving and changing the built environment for over 100 years in the UK, and we do the same all around the world as well. Since 1990, we have had BREEAM as one of our premier sustainability products, and that takes a holistic approach to sustainability, really trying to enhance and drive forward the built environment towards all the challenges that we know we share around net zero carbon, diversity, making buildings good places to live and work, for example.
That's great, which is, as I said, it's kind of like one of the major direction for Daikin as well, like working in the building environment, because at the end of the day, that's what we do day in and day out. We are there to help people that design building to solve problems when it comes to comfort, not just cooling, but heating in general, sort of good, promoting good air quality, because we all spend a huge amount of time inside buildings for leisure, for work, for anything else. And so, it's massively important to have the good environment to live and stay there. So one of the other drivers for having this conversation is, as you alluded just a second ago, a new version of BREEAM just came out. Exciting times for you?
Very exciting, very busy.
Time?
Yes, but it's going well. So we've published our technical requirements for both the UK market and the international market, and the new platform is due to launch this month. So we're very excited about that. We know we've got customers very keen to start using the new system, and we really want to start getting that out to the market, getting more feedback from it.
Right, take me through, in probably a bit of an abridged version, shall we say, given that we don't have a week full of time. Like, what does it take to go from one version to another? Like, what are the major steps that you go through in terms of saying, well, we have a framework in place. How do we evolve it? How do we move it forward?
So there's a number of considerations always. One of the first things is looking at how our customers are already using the current systems in the market. Getting feedback from our customers, listening to them, and incorporating to make BREEAM better from that point of view. But we also need to consider other factors. So something like what are the changes that are happening? So is either legislation or the impacts of climate change, as an example, are they driving further change? And that's what we'd call our science base within BREEAM. So that's another aspect that we review. And then we think about a final bit, which is technology. So we are always trying to keep BREEAM at that edge of what is possible. And what we're trying to do is move the whole built environment, which is why we have these performance scales. So wherever buildings are, you can start using BREEAM, you can start improving, but we also want to look at the very best buildings, the outstanding buildings, and see what is the art of the possible, and having those exemplars out in the market that can really drive and others can aspire towards emulating over time, and things like new technologies feed into that. So we take all of that, put that together and say, what is our next update going to look like? So for version 7, the focus was on net zero carbon. That was the overriding focus, but we also took the opportunity to do a couple of other bits around biodiversity and really expanding our requirements around that, particularly in the international market. And then finally, because we always want to be a holistic, balanced system, we've also done some work on our daylighting natural light requirements as well. Because as you say, it's always about a balance. You can lower carbon, but you need to make sure that the buildings still operate for their intended purpose for the people inside those buildings, and you don't want unintended consequences for the natural environment, for example. So we take all of that, package that together and say what is going into this release, and then we work through and update our technical requirements. And in this instance, we're also creating a new digital platform as well, which has been a multi-year project, and that is what BREEAM version 7 will be launching on.
Right. Tell me a bit more about this platform.
Mhm.
What are the objective of this platform? Is it to make it easier to work with BREEAM, to go through the assessment?
Absolutely. So there's a number of things that we're trying to do with this platform. Obviously, make it easier, update it. But from a end customer point of view, we're also trying to engage them in the process as well. So we've switched the way that we set the platform up to be more focused on individual assets rather than assessments. And this means that clients who own or operate those assets can engage more in the BREEAM process, and we can track the performance of assets over time. At the moment, the way that BREEAM is set up, we look at assessment by assessment, and what we know is that we need buildings today, either new buildings or existing buildings, to progress and change over the next 25, 30 years. And so by taking this asset focus, we can start telling the story of those assets over time. So how are they performing today? How are they performing in use 5 years, 10 years down the line? And then when it comes to needing to do a renovation or a refurbishment, how is that being captured? And hopefully for, say, carbon, we can track a downward trajectory going forward. And for things like biodiversity, we can track an upward trajectory and say, these buildings are having a positive impact over their lifestyle.
And I think that's actually a massive change that we're also seeing with our customer base and the mindset of them saying, yes, I've got a building, I'm building a building now, but I really want to know and be in control of what and how that building is going to progress over its life, and how can I make sure that what I set out to achieve at the beginning actually becomes true once the building is done, is in operations, and for the natural life. And as I said, we're definitely seen as a bit of a shift. So even from our point of view, we had to adapt and create new services, a new way to, for example, monitor energy usage and performance of our system, so we were able to feed that data, that information back when we talk again the big building. Because that's the other thing that I mean, I guess many people know, but sometimes it still kind of not takes me by surprise. But when I think about it, so we are, and when I say like we in terms of the HVAC side of a building, all things considered, we are a small portion of everything else that goes inside the building. And again, when you look at all the chapters of BREEAM and you look at everything else, wow, there's a lot of data and there's a lot of consideration to be made there. So I cannot assume that anything that can be done to simplify and make it a bit more user friendly can also be a benefit in terms of say, let's use the framework, because it doesn't just become a huge maybe admin task or a checkbook exercise that you have to go through, but it actually delivers value.
Absolutely, delivers value and delivers impact on the built environment, which are not necessarily always the same thing, but very closely related. And if we can set up our services within, such as the digital platform, to help that transition and facilitate that, that's exactly what we're trying to do. And as well as obviously the digital side of things, we're also looking at how we structure BREEAM as well. So a very simple example is up till this version of BREEAM, we had different names for the different building types across the different life cycle stages. And it's just a small barrier that gets in the way of customers. And it's like, we can break that down. We can have consistency. We can have alignment. And we know that, as you say, with HVAC, it's a small part of the overall building. We know that BREEAM is a small part of a wider ecosystem of sustainability. So again, we work very closely with others to say, what data can we take in to BREEAM, make sure that's as accurate and efficient as possible, and then what data and insights can we export from BREEAM to other services, and the digital platform will help us to do that.
That's wonderful. How do you see your customer approaching BREEAM? As in, like, what do you see being maybe the major drivers? Because again, we talk about the fact that BREEAM looks after, and we'll talk a bit more about that, but it looks at after a lot of different chapters, lots of different items. Is there always some particular areas that sort of are the main drivers, and then everything else sort of comes after that? Or it can be a myriad of different options that lead to someone say, I want to go for a certain level in BREEAM?
There are different contexts for BREEAM. So in the UK market, there's quite a regulatory planning focus for BREEAM. So a lot of local authorities set particular levels. So for example, a BREEAM Excellent or potentially a BREEAM Outstanding if you want planning permission. But what we're seeing is there's been a dramatic shift over my time working on BREEAM, which is in fact, it's kind of building owner and investor led, because what they're seeing is the real value in having sustainable portfolios and being able to invest in sustainable portfolios. How do they know that a portfolio of buildings is sustainable? Well, BREEAM is a tool to do that. So what they want to understand is how the money that they are investing is either going to buy them sustainable, resilient financially assets over the long term, or if they've got existing buildings, how are they performing today, and what's the scope for improving those over time? And that means that we've seen quite a mindset shift in how people approach BREEAM. If I go back 10 years, there was a number of people who would argue, but I have to do that, so I will do that in the easiest or least effective way I can that just gets me over the line without putting the thought into it. We're really seeing a shift where, as you say, people want the outcomes, and therefore they approach BREEAM in a different way, and therefore engage with the system, really try and kind of enhance and use the tool that we've provided to get the best out of it. And that's because their investors are saying, we're spending this money on a new asset or an existing portfolio, we want the most return for our investment.
And I can see that being a very strong motivator.
Absolutely, absolutely.
In changing minds.
Yeah, it really does.
So we were chatting before we started, and you of course saying that you don't just look at the UK, but you're very much sort of looking at the international pictures as well. Are there any major differences that you see across different regions in terms of the usage of BREEAM, but also within BREEAM, maybe areas that are a bit more of interest than other, depending on which region you are looking at?
Absolutely. So we always design BREEAM to flex for those differences. And what we see in the European context is there is a lot more legislation driving things forward. So things like the EPBD and the F-gas regulations set a benchmark, and then things like the EU taxonomy come along. And again, coming back to the finance point, people want to be able to approach EU taxonomy finance and use BREEAM as a way to do that. So for version 7, we've been a lot more explicit and aligned BREEAM a lot closer with the EU taxonomy to help demonstrate that, and again, lower the barriers for going through the BREEAM process. But then when you look at some of the changes that we've made in a European and particularly UK context, some of the net zero carbon requirements, something like the UK net zero carbon building standard as BRE, we've been very closely involved with that, and BREEAM version 7 aligns very closely with the UK net zero carbon building standard. When you then look to Europe, you've got their zero energy building definition. And again, we keep an eye on what they're specifying, make sure we align with that. And their embodied carbon is a particularly important aspect, and therefore the European market is quite a long way ahead in terms of embodied carbon.
Mm-hmm.
When we go to North America, which is another big market for us, LCA analysis, EPDs, they're not quite as advanced as they are in the UK or the Netherlands or some of our other big markets. So there are different challenges there. And again, we try and accommodate those. Then when you go to some of our other markets in Asia, there are slightly different challenges. They are building at pace. They have potentially more impact from climate change adaptation requirements because some of those areas are more exposed than some Northern European cities. However, what we are seeing now is the impacts of climate change in Europe are really being felt. A few years ago, we had our first kind of wildfires in the UK. We've had 40-degree days in the UK. How is the built environment set up for that? And the short answer in the UK context is not very well.
Yep.
But there are similar challenges across the world.
That's and I always like to take a bit of a step back from just a local market, because it immediately shows, and again, we should know these just in terms of everything else that happens is very interconnected and intertwined, but especially in the building environment and some of the legislations around how we move the building environment. It's always great to, as I said, take a step backwards, see, okay, how do we compare, how do we contrast, what can we learn, what can we take on board? And then we had a very similar journey and approach, even from an EPD point of view, from an embodied carbon point of view, from a Daikin perspective. We started seeing changes in France, being the first area that really look at that kind of information and started to mandate it in a more sort of a stringent way. And then we said, well, we've done all the effort there. What can we learn? How we can adapt? How can we start using that information? Then things like, again, BREEAM version 7 comes along. We start to see what the relationship with embodied carbons is there. And suddenly we already have some of the answer there. So for us, it's massive to be able to take. And I think that's also one of the strengths of an organization like Daikin, being able to rely on that big network, have a bit more of a larger picture, see what's coming down the line, and be able to anticipate some of those changes.
And if you've got the solutions in one market, how do you then globalize those? Because ultimately, a lot of the challenges are global challenges.
Yes.
So take the best from each of those markets, each of those solutions, globalize them as much as possible, and BREEAM takes exactly the same approach there.
That's great. Right, let's dive a bit more deeper into version 7. Highlights. Where do we start? Like, how can we say put version 7 into the framework and say, okay, what were the major evolution compared to the previous version?
So the biggest change that I think is relevant for this audience is around the net zero carbon and how we've pushed that agenda forward. As I said, there is also work that we've done on biodiversity, but if we focus on the net zero carbon aspect, within BREEAM version 7, we've taken the broadest definition of whole life carbon and then improved all of those aspects of BREEAM. So within our energy calculations, we have separated out our prediction of operational energy requirements into their own issue. So this is something that you say, not just what does regulation require us to cover, but what is the prediction for how much operational carbon this building will generate overall? And that gives you a number that you can then compare 3-5 years down the line using a BREEAM in use system to say, actually, is this delivering as we intended? Are the systems and services operating as effectively and efficiently? Are there any changes? Do we need to do any refinement? So as you mentioned, the kind of the customer expectation now is not only I have paid for this piece of equipment, but I want the outcome that piece of equipment promised me, and I want to verify that that's happening. So that was one of the big changes.
Are there any specific framework or recommended calculations or recommended methodology to do that predictive model?
Yeah, so within, we do set out a predicted prediction framework there, but we also recognize other things like NABERS UK in the UK market, so that you can use that design for performance, and then you can again measure on an in-use performance. So philosophically, they're on the same basis, and actually technically they are now very closely aligned as well. The other big thing around that, and again aligning with the UK net zero carbon building regulation, is that if you want to be a BREEAM outstanding building today, you can no longer have fossil fuel combustion on site.
Right. That's quite a big one.
It is quite a big one. There are a few, obviously, caveats. So if you've got backup generators, we're not going to say for a hospital, for example, you cannot have emergency backup.
But let's say it cannot be the primary source of, for example, space heating or something like that.
Exceptions, you cannot have fossil fuel combustion on site if you want to be BREEAM outstanding. The other thing that we've done, coming back to our LCA embodied carbon conversation, is made some of these minimum requirements. So previously, and over the last 15 years, we've been pushing forward the importance of embodied carbon within BREEAM. And as I said, the UK has led, and therefore the UK version of BREEAM was further forward than our international version.
Right.
We now have those completely aligned. And so if you want to be BREEAM excellent, you have to do an LCA calculation. If you want to do BREEAM outstanding, you have to do LCA calculations at different stages of the construction process. And we are now introducing global benchmarks as well for embodied carbon. So it's not just have you done an LCA, but also you now have to hit particular levels if you want to get the top credits within BREEAM.
Have you seen, have you already gotten some feedback in terms of this shift and these extra requirements, and how was that received in terms of?
So, as I said, we've had some of this in previous versions of BREEAM, and listening to our customers, one of the big changes we made from the UK version was actually to break it down, because we know as part of the BREEAM process, while we encourage assessors to be involved right at the start, and it does make the process easier and deliver more value overall, if they get pulled in later, it used to cause problems. By splitting up the requirements between the different life cycle stages, we've overcome that problem. I think it will still be challenging in other markets that are less familiar with doing LCA calculations. But as I say, there is a performance scale of BREEAM. We've introduced these at the highest for the excellent outstanding ratings. Some places will still be able to target a very good, or they will get there, but in a few years' time. So we're trying to drive the whole market forward.
Fair enough. And I guess that's probably, I've always seen what you just said in terms of trying to drive the market forward as one of the big contribution of BREEAM at the end of the day. It's like setting up the example, setting up the frameworks, and saying, if we all say that we want to evolve, we all say that we want to reach zero carbons, and we want to be sort of very forward thinking, this is the blueprint that can actually sort of allow you a practical way to get there.
Give you the steps on that journey, because it is a journey. So I think sometimes people focus on net zero carbon and think my building has to achieve this today, and forget that this was a global societal goal for 2050. So while each individual building can play its part, it is a journey towards 2050 and net zero carbon being a destination.
And I also think it's sometimes where it helps in sort of having frameworks in place that gives you direction, allows you to break down the problem in smaller chunks. Because I think sometimes when you just said, well, we want to be net zero by 2050, that's a big statement.
It is.
It's a big goal. Yeah. And if you've never really thought about it, or again, you are on the start of a journey and you are not necessarily sure what the next steps are, it kind of seems an impossible barrier or an impossible goal to achieve. But then instead, when you start saying, okay, let's take that problem and let's break it down into smaller chunks, and I'm going to give you instruction for every single step of the way. And then when you look backward, you see, look how far I've come. So that's, I think, also. Absolutely. And honestly, we do find ourselves in a similar position, again, looking at our area in terms of the HVAC market. when again we as well as a manufacturer, we have all sort of restrictions in terms of place on us from a European level with
Yeah.
the F-gas quota phase down and the changes in refrigerant. And for our partners as well is a big change. So a lot of the
Yeah.
things that we end up doing is, let's call it education fundamentally,
Absolutely.
in terms of saying
Yeah.
we're all on a journey
Yeah.
and we are going to tell you one step at a time how we're going to get there and what are the new refrigerant, the new technologies and the new advancement that will allow you to get there. Again, making sure, because I think at the end of the day, big organizations like ours, we also have the tools and the resources to do that investigations, to do some of the work in the background to then make the life a bit easier for the rest of the market and help them along the way, rather than just dump it all on them and said, that's your problem.
Yeah.
You go and figure it out.
Indeed. And that is BRE's purpose. We're here to drive change in the built environment, positive change. So we've got to take the whole ecosystem with us, all of those different components of it. Yeah.
So we spoke about, you mentioned embodied carbon.
Yeah.
Are there any specific tools, frameworks that again can be used as a reference when doing the LCA calculations? Is there anything that you specifically it's mentioned within the new version of BREEAM?
For the LCA, what we look for is approved LCA methodologies, and we already have some existing ones from existing versions of BREEAM, and we're looking to update those. So we're working very closely with LCA tool providers to do that. And then equally with EPDs, which again we've separated out, making sure that we reflect the best EPDs that are out there, and again reward customers and organizations for going through the EPD process and therefore providing better data into the system. Because particularly around embodied carbon, we know that the data is not as good as it needs to be today. So one of the things that we've introduced is not only the LCA requirements, but then third-party verification of those LCAs to make sure that the quality is as good as it can be, and reporting those requirements to national carbon databases. So in the UK, we've got something called the BECD, the Built Environment Carbon Database. And again, that's trying to build up an understanding of what good looks like for embodied carbon, and do a similar thing in other countries as well. So that as we go on this journey towards 2050, the benchmarks improve, they get more refined, and you can start to do more kind of nuanced comparisons of not only is my office comparable to other offices, but is this particular type of office or an office with these kind of requirements or equipment also comparable as well. So you can get into that level of detail. So that's one of the things we've done. And EPDs are a foundation of having the right data to go into those LCA calculations.
Do you see, from an EPD point of view, because it's been quite a journey for us as well in terms of starting to provide this document, and I think now we are at the stage where when I look at our portfolio products, we probably cover a good 90-ish% of products that certainly within the, let's say, the commercial sector, so anything that would go into medium to larger buildings, we are able to provide EPDs, again, thanks to France and their sort of initial requirements from a legislation point of view, and us essentially saying, thanks for the homework.
Okay, we'll do that.
We'll take it from there. We'll make some changes and adaptation to, of course, translate it to the UK, not just language-wise, but data-wise as well. But do you see, again, when you look at an entire sort of building and all the bits and pieces that go into the building, do you see areas where EPDs are more common than others, or is it, on average, sort of a well-understood concept? And
on average, I would probably say not well understood. There are areas where it is better understood. So some of the bigger kind of bulk materials historically had EPDs first, but kind of mechanical systems, I think Dakin are one of the companies that have been leading on that area. And we know that when we go and look at, say, the US market, that market is quite far behind in terms of its understanding of EPDs and LCA calculations. they do have those systems, but they're very much kind of the exception rather than the rule.
Right.
As you say, things like the legislation in France, European requirements, those in London as well, have really driven LCA requirements, EPD requirements forward faster in those markets. But we know that supply chains are global, so let's take the best practice in some markets and try and apply that around the world.
And when you look at the so it's the material 01, right?
Yes.
The chapter that
Yeah.
will be more involved with
Yeah.
the LCA. So is there a minimum requirements in terms of so when you look at when we say the LCA calculation,
Yeah.
again we look at the entire building.
Yes.
Is there a minimum requirement in terms of saying, I don't know, at least X amount of components that will go into the building need to provide these calculations for you to get
Exactly.
X amount of points?
Yes. So for the LCA, you're doing a whole building LCA.
Okay.
And again, you're trying to capture the whole life cycle of the building materials. So for those of you who know and are familiar, A to D,
Yep.
excluding B, 6 and 7.
Okay.
So the full life cycle of the materials, putting those in, and then again, coming back to what we're trying to do with the digital platform, we know for the UK Net Zero Carbon Building Standard, they only look at upfront carbon, so you're able to report on that. In other markets, they're very interested in things like biogenic carbon. So by having our platform capture all of the data, again, we can provide metrics with for that as well. But yes, it's all of the components of the building that need to go into those calculations.
Fair enough. Quite a big change, I would say, but definitely needed.
Yes.
I would say,
Yeah.
because as we keep saying, sort of lower embodied carbon is going to be the name of the game.
Exactly.
Considering that, again, the major assumption that, again, I see on a European level is the idea of, well, operational carbon will get better because electricity grid and electricity production is going to get a bit more greener. So there's going to be an even bigger spotlight on the actual base materials and what makes the final.
BRE research has shown that over the years that as buildings have got more sustainable, the proportion of a life cycle of a building that is taken up by the embodied carbon component has slowly increased over time, and the operational component has decreased. And we will continue to see that. So as you say, the spotlight really is on embodied carbon at the moment.
And I think it's the good thing at the end of the day. It's not just for the building itself and for the final results, but it's also for us as a manufacturer, as it immediately gave us ideas on how can we change our manufacturing processes, how can we improve the manufacturing processes, how do we change how we source some of the raw materials, and can we start to leverage more and more recycled components, which we're doing more and more. But it's, and probably it's because I like numbers and I like data and that kind of thing. I don't know, it's not everybody's cup of tea in that sense, but it's amazing once you go through the exercise of creating an EPDs, really the details that it gives you about your products. And there's no hiding, it's very clear, it's very black and white on a piece of paper, and it immediately shows, oh, I didn't realize that. So for example, just to give you an example, one of the things that we realize is when we look, for example, at the VRV system, so big outdoor, medium-sized outdoor unit that it's on many roofs around London. One of the key contributor from an embodied carbon point of view of that system is the PCB, which is the smallest single components that goes inside of those systems. And there's lots of noble metals in theirs, and of course it's a very intensive process in terms of all those micro components. But it's one thing that probably it would not be intuitively something that you would guess in terms of say, well, it's a big old machine, and that smallest component is actually the biggest contributor. So it's those kind of conversation that immediately sort of allow us to say, well, now that we know that, how do we address it? How do we change this? How do we make sure that we can improve? Because as we keep saying, the focus is going to grow more and more. And even over the last couple of years, we've seen it directly where we went from nobody asking anything in relation to embodied carbon and us really saying, this is coming, we've seen to CPC introduced TM65,
Yeah.
and that was already a sort of a very good step, and they
Yeah.
gave us an initial ideas. To, I would say, 6 months after the introduction of TM65, I said, what about EPDs?
Yeah.
Hold on. What's all of this? So we've seen a massive sort of speed up in terms of the demand for that data.
And that is absolutely fantastic to hear, because that is why we do BREEAM, because what we want is the process to then trigger changes. If it's not triggering changes, if it's just a paperwork exercise, there's no point there. What we want is for the likes of Dakin to go, we can make this thing better. We can lower the carbon emissions of this, make genuine changes that then have an impact. And that's what makes me optimistic overall that we are going to get there. There's a lot of very smart people. If we can get the direction right, get everyone focused on the common problem and understanding the problem, the solutions are out there. If you look how far kind of renewable technologies have come, no one would have been predicting 10, 15 years ago that the price of renewables would be as low as it is. The price of batteries would be as low as it is. It's absolutely fantastic what we've achieved.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I think sometimes people complain about legislations and it being too stringent, but I also see it as a way to really focus attention and give the likes of manufacturer a clear idea of, okay, now we have a framework, we know what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
Now we can plan the changes, we can plan the improvements rather than the uncertainty or sort of not having a framework that can lead to going in all sort of direction. It really focused the mind. And I really think about the the F-gas quota phase down initially, big shock.
Yeah.
Because everything that we do has refrigerant in it. And so how do we deal with that?
Yeah.
But then now that we have it, now that we have a clear direction down to 2050, fine. We can plan it. We can work with that. We can advance the technology. And
we will put that in the kind of context of transition risk. All of these new legislations that potentially will come along are a transition risk for either those investing in the built environment or manufacturers, etc. And again, one of the things that BREEAM looks to do is understand those transition risks, and therefore you can manage them. If you don't know what's coming down the track, what potentially is out there, then you will get caught out. And as you say, kind of a new regulation will come out and people will panic. But again, BREEAM can help you understand what those transition risks are and therefore manage those risks, de-risk your portfolio, de-risk your investments. I'm sure they can put a lot of time and effort and money into making sure that they have that pathway to 2050. Fantastic. I'm sure your CFO was very pleased to say all the risks that potentially are coming along, they have been mitigated. And the same as you're investing in whole buildings rather than individual systems.
yeah, absolutely. Because again, going back to what we were mentioning in the beginning, if I put myself in the shoes of investor, for example, they are not expert. They just want to build it.
Yeah.
And so the more frameworks there are there, the more clear guidance is there, the more, again, it makes it easier for everyone involved in the process to say, okay, you want to achieve a certain goal, I can show you a very clear and easy path to get there. Now, speaking of refrigerant, big one, Pole 01.
Yes.
For us has always been a key areas of focus because normally Pole 01 we will be the sole contributor toward that specific chapter in a building. What's changing there?
So Pole 01, for those of you who don't speak fluent BREEAM, is Pollution 01,
very good point.
which is the impact of...
I do get lost sometimes in acronyms when I see them day in and day out, so good point.
It's the impact of refrigerants, and it's a calculation looking at the overall life cycle impact of refrigerants. The calculation itself hasn't changed, so you do need to understand what kind of systems you've got, what kind of refrigerants are in those systems, etc. What has changed, going back to our net zero carbon, whole life carbon conversation earlier, is that refrigerant emissions or fugitive refrigerant emissions are one of the key aspects of a net zero carbon definition. So in response to that, we've introduced a minimum standard that you now have to do the POL 01 calculation if you want to be a BREEAM outstanding building. So whereas before you could choose to ignore it, now it will be mandatory for any outstanding building. We have set the standard only for one credit, but it does mean that people will start asking that question. And as you said, when people start asking the question, they start saying, why is that number so high?
Yep.
How much can we lower it? And again, it sets a trend, it sets a direction. Once people start to understand this, in future iterations of BREEAM and potentially future regulations, these numbers are going to get tighter. People are going to focus on the global warming impact of refrigerants more and more and see how we can reduce those.
So the chapter itself is still, you can still get up to 3 points.
Yes.
Correct. So
Yeah.
it's 2 depending on how much, or if you have refrigerant to begin with,
Exactly.
and 1 linked to leak detection.
Yeah,
for the refrigerant.
exactly.
But so the big change is if you want outstanding, you have to have at least 1
yes,
credit
exactly.
out of that chapter.
Yeah.
Great. Is there, like, when you were thinking of making that change, was there also any conversation in terms of trying to focus a bit more on the type of refrigerant, or was it maybe too early to say completely, I don't know, ban or remove from the conversation certain type of refrigerants?
So we're not looking to ban them, but with certain types of refrigerant, they are just going to not allow you to get that credit.
Okay.
And from a kind of a banning things point of view, that's where I think legislation can step in. So we look at things like F-gas regulations. But as I say, it is setting a direction of travel. So right now, if you want to be outstanding, you've got to achieve this level. Will those levels come down in future? Potentially. We'll be looking at that for version 8. Will that minimum standard move down to, for example, an excellent or a very good? That would be another way we could approach it. But what we know is this is going to become an increasing focus. So we talked about kind of how climate is changing around the world. With these increasing temperatures, we are expecting increasing use of things like air conditioning. Therefore, refrigerants will be in more buildings, used more widely, and therefore form a bigger proportion of an overall whole life carbon assessment of a building. So again, the attention is going to shift. As operational carbon is reduced, embodied carbon will be more important. Refrigerant emissions, again, will be more important. And another one we haven't mentioned, just a little detail, the carbon emissions associated with water will also become increasingly important. And again, in whole life carbon definitions, that is often forgotten about. But again, it's something that BREEAM can report on because we also cover water as well. But yeah, I would say the trend will be that the POL 1 requirements will get tougher over time.
Fair enough. Do you see, and this is it might be just completely speculation or just, but do you see any way to maybe start to differentiate between virgin refrigerant and reclaimed refrigerant in terms of how refrigerant is being looked at within maybe the framework of BREEAM?
Absolutely, we can start looking at that. So as I say, the calculation that we've got has been in place for a number of years. If there are new processes, new technologies, BREEAM will need to respond to that. So what we need to understand is have a good science base for what would the change be?
Yep.
How would we reflect that change? How would we evidence that change? But absolutely, that is the kind of thing that we can start looking towards.
Because we've, because I said, refrigerant is a lot of what we do at the end of the day.
Yep.
So even from our side, we started making a lot of investment in terms of using more and more reclaimed refrigerant, trying to avoid some of the, effectively the emission related with the manufacturing processes of having to manufacture new refrigerant, because on top of producing the final system, and this is something that a lot of people may not necessarily know, but Daikin is also a big refrigerant manufacturer to begin with.
Yeah.
So it all counts at the end of the day in terms of the emission and where things are coming from. So we've definitely started making a significant shift toward using reclaimed refrigerant. But what we are seeing at the moment is that we don't really find a way to reflect
Yeah,
that into
absolutely.
the various frameworks,
Yeah.
like things like TM65, things
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
EPDs and all of that. They are still, it's still
Yeah.
just refrigerant.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter where it's
Yeah.
coming from. But so we hope that maybe eventually in
Yeah.
some years times there will start to be some level of differentiation. Not just because of something that we do, but I think it will promote even more
Yeah.
the idea of you have fundamentally at the end of the day you have refrigerant, which is a substance that doesn't really have an expiry date.
Yes.
As long
Yeah.
as it's taken out of the system, processed correctly, and placed back in the market with the right level of quality, you can keep going on and on and on and on. And we just had a sit down with some of our partner with Agas, and that's what we do with them. So I think realizing, or let's say having a way to show what are the benefits of doing that, again in a very black and white way, would certainly be a further push for that side of the industry to say, we really need to focus on reusing and recycling.
And that absolutely goes back to my point about that you asked, how do we update BREEAM?
Yeah.
These are the kind of things. So are there new processes that we can reflect in future? Sounds like yes, there are, but also working with the wider industry. So do we need to have conversations with SIBC to reflect or to update TM65 and work with them? Do we do that in BREEAM so we can provide a framework that that takes those kind of new and innovative ideas forward faster? Because BREEAM has always had this innovation category to try and drive forward exactly these kind of new processes. And how do we do that in a conjoined way that minimizes the impact on the wider industry in terms of new reporting burdens, new evidence, new calculations? If we can get those aligned, it really means that then others will go, Dakin are doing it, can we do that? So we also get that same recognition, that same reward. And obviously from a Dakin point of view, that may be not what you want to hear, but from an industry, societal point of view, we need to take the whole industry with us.
But we've always been big in terms of trying to be the first one to implement a change.
Yeah.
But then in a sense, show the way, lead the way.
Exactly.
Like we're doing the same from a technology point of view. We were the first one to sort of bring to the market R32 systems.
Yes.
And then a few years after, we released all the patents on the market to say, well, we know that that's the direction that the industry should take. We don't want red tape to prevent the rest of the industry from making that step forward. So here we go. So for us, it's always a case of we want to show the way, but we want to make sure that everybody joins the race to go to net zero in this case. So
Absolutely
the more the merrier.
Yeah.
In that sense.
Yeah.
So we spoke about the three main chapters that were really close to Dakin in a sense. Anything else? Any other sort of big change that you want to highlight in other areas of BREEAM versus 7?
So one of the other things, as I said, we are looking across the whole life cycle of buildings.
Yep.
So while we have published our new construction version, we are finalizing our RFO version, refurbishment version now. And that's going to come back to a lot of these conversations. So we know that a lot of the buildings that exist today are still going to be here in 2050. So how do you replace or how do you improve those with minimizing the impact on embodied carbon? And things like the HVAC systems in those buildings, what do you do with the existing refrigerants, etc.? And then again, we've got in-use coming about summer next year in the current plans. So having that whole consistent package of version 7 is one of the big changes that we're rolling out over the next year. So very excited about all of that.
When can we expect version 8? Too early?
Too early. I've just got the version 7 plans all lined up nicely, but yeah.
Fair enough. So since we are getting close to the end of the conversation today, if our audience want to know more about it, or maybe wants to get more directly involved with BREEAM and the BRE, what would be the best place to go or the best way to be a bit more directly involved?
So we've got a lot of resources on our website, so they can go on. There is a summary of changes that lists out all the differences between the current versions of BREEAM and the new versions. Obviously, they can look at the technical documentation as well. They can talk to their BREEAM assessors and APs. We've run a whole series of training programs, and videos are being provided to them so that they know exactly what's coming, both with version 7 and with the new platform. And then, as we say, the new platform is very much designed to start engaging clients and customers as well. So if people want to learn more, they can start creating their assets, creating logins in the platform from the end of this month onwards, and then they can start seeing the results themselves of their BREEAM assessments. They don't have to wait for the assessor to tell them. So we would really encourage end clients and customers to get more involved in that way, and then others can get more of the technical detail, as I said, by going to the website.
Okay, I will put all the links in the description, so easy to find. You did mention BREEAM Assessor.
Yes.
How one can become one?
So there are training courses to be BREEAM assessors. We've got about 4,000 assessors globally. So if you go onto our website again, the BRE Academy run the assessor training courses. We have in-person classroom courses. We've got virtual classroom. We have completely online courses as well, because we have done BREEAM assessments all around the world, including Antarctica. I'm always very proud of that one.
How many assessors have you got in Antarctica?
We have no assessors in Antarctica. The person did have to travel down there. But yeah, we've got some buildings out there. And then, yeah, anywhere in the world you can get BREEAM assessors. They're all listed on the website. And if people want to train, you can go through the BRE Academy to do that.
Wonderful. Anything else you would like our audience to know when it comes to BREEAM, BRE, or anything like that?
So I think for me, one of the interesting and exciting trends that's coming down the line is this focus on resilience. And that's both the physical resilience of assets themselves, but also around the transition risks as well. So I would encourage people to look out in our refurbishment and in-use manual for an increased focus on resilience alongside all of the improvements around net zero carbon and biodiversity that we've talked about.
Wonderful. Well, Tom, thank you very much for your time today. It was a brilliant conversation, and I'm sure the audience will take quite a lot on board from this conversation. So again, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you. It's been very interesting.
Great stuff. Thanks again for listening to this episode of On Air, and I'll see you all into the next episode. Bye-bye.